Today we delve into a case that once shook India to its core, the infamous tandoor oven murder. On a summer night in 1995, in the heart of New Delhi, flames erupted from a restaurant's tandoor oven. But they didn't just consume a body, they burned away the moral facade of a society corroded by power, prejudice, and silence. A woman's scream pierced the night, pulling back the curtain on one of the most brutal murder cases the country had ever seen. So what exactly happened that night? Let's find out. At 11 p.m. on July 2, 1995, the Anand Parbat neighborhood in India's capital was eerily silent. Out of nowhere, thick black smoke began pouring from the Yatri Niwas Hotel. A massive blaze had broken out at a restaurant located on the left side of the building. Its origin, a tandoor oven. The fire spread rapidly. A nearby police patrol rushed to the scene and attempted to intervene, but restaurant staff blocked their entry, claiming they were just burning old posters and that the flames would soon die down. Moments later, however, the fire intensified, leaping nearly 30 feet into the air. The officers grew suspicious. Could burning mere trash cause such an enormous blaze? Then, a woman's terrified scream echoed from the restaurant. One officer insisted on entering but was stopped again. He decided to find another way in, circling around to the back of the restaurant and climbing over the wall. In the backyard, beside the roaring tandoor, a man was fanning the flames. Closer to the entrance, another man in white pajamas stood still behind a partition. Neither seemed bothered by the overwhelming stench of burning flesh and rot. As the officer approached, one of the men stepped forward, claiming to be a member of the ruling Indian National Congress Party, and said he was acting under orders to destroy outdated materials. At the time, just mentioning that political affiliation was often enough to deter law enforcement. Many officers might have walked away after a simple fire safety warning, but this officer didn't. As he looked closer, he spotted something sticking out of the oven, something that resembled a human limb. His blood ran cold. Without hesitation, he rushed into the kitchen, grabbed a bucket of water, and doused the flames. Within 5 minutes, the fire was under control. A foul mix of charred smoke and a metallic stench filled the air. When the officer peered inside the oven, he used a long bamboo stick to stir the ashes. What he uncovered was horrifying. A human body, blackened and curled into itself, reduced to little more than cinders. Though the body was badly burned and almost unrecognizable, it was clear that the victim was a woman. Her limbs were charred, and her abdomen had burst open from the intense heat. The scene was so grotesque that even the bravest officer struggled to look directly at it. In India, cremation is not illegal. In fact, it's one of the most common ways to handle the deceased, particularly among Hindus. For them, it's a sacred rite, meant to free the soul and guide it into the next life. But in this case, that sanctity was perverted into something monstrous. An innocent woman's body was cremated in secret, in the dead of night. No ritual, no prayer, no love. That fire didn't set her spirit free. It erased every trace of her existence. Once the flames were extinguished, a charred body slowly emerged from the ashes. The restaurant instantly descended into chaos. What initially seemed like a simple trash fire had now become the center of a gruesome murder investigation. At that moment, the officer's attention locked onto the man fanning the flames, Keshav Kumar, the manager of the barbecue restaurant. He stood beside the tandoor with a tense expression, visibly shielding his boss, Sushil Sharma. Sushil, a rising political figure and former president of the Delhi Youth Congress, had deep ties within the ruling party. Just minutes earlier, police had seen Sushil in white pajamas standing near the oven. But by the time they turned back, he had vanished. Fortunately, officers arrived in time to gather critical evidence: a blood-stained black plastic bag, a scorched silver bracelet found inside the oven, fragments of bone, partially burned clothing, as well as bricks and dry firewood. They also confiscated a blood-splattered kurta that Keshav was still wearing. Investigators, however, didn't believe Keshav was the mastermind. His anxious demeanor and hesitations pointed more to someone being coerced rather than someone committing a crime of his own will. Still, it was obvious he knew what had happened, and likely knew exactly who was behind it: Sushil. That same afternoon, the police chief addressed the media and announced a reward of 1 million rupees for any information leading to the whereabouts of Sushil Sharma. Meanwhile, they turned up the pressure on Keshav, the only person who could reveal the truth. Initially, Keshav tried to mislead the investigation by blaming another restaurant employee, but physical evidence at the scene made it clear that Sushil had brought the body in himself, and Keshav's lies quickly unraveled. It was unclear whether Keshav's silence stemmed from loyalty or fear, but once police warned him that continued dishonesty could jeopardize not just his own future, but that of his entire family, including his children, he gave in. He confessed everything. During interrogation, Keshav confirmed the investigators' worst suspicions. The real culprit was none other than Sushil Sharma, a well-known and ambitious politician. The body that had been burned in the oven was his 29-year-old wife, Naina Sahni. Keshav recounted that while helping Sushil place the body onto the fire, he couldn't see her face clearly, but her build and clothing made her identity unmistakable. At Sushil's instruction, he had even gone out to buy butter to throw into the fire, hoping to intensify the flames. So what could drive a man like Sushil, ambitious, politically ascendant, to murder his own wife at such a pivotal moment in his career? The investigation revealed that Sushil came from a lower middle-class background. His father worked as a bank employee, and his mother was a homemaker. The family lived modestly. Yet even during his college years, Sushil had already demonstrated a deep passion and talent for politics. Amid the chaos of student life, filled with protests, election campaigns, and power plays, he seemed to find his calling, a man born to wield control. Sushil's ambition knew no bounds. In the years following India's emergency period, his political stature continued to rise. Among fellow students, he earned the nickname the Knife Man for his habit of slashing the posters of rival candidates. Over time, his tactics escalated. What began with a knife evolved into firearms, and from vandalism to threats and kidnappings. He and his loyal band of followers gained a notorious reputation for their violent behavior, flaunting authority and operating with impunity. His name spread across campus as someone powerful and dangerous. Gifted with sharp political instincts, Sushil quickly earned the trust of senior leaders when he joined the All India Students' Federation. In 1979, he ran for vice president of the Delhi University Student Union and finished third. Rumor had it that after losing the election, he stormed into a travel agency and threatened the winning candidate with a knife. At the time, student politics in India were steeped in violence. Shootings, stabbings, and kidnappings of political rivals were not uncommon. In 1981, a fatal stabbing of the student union president at Shyamlal College rocked the community. Members of the All India Students' Federation, then under Sushil's near-total control, were implicated. Thanks to his political connections, Sushil avoided indictment, while only his direct accomplices were arrested and convicted. In 1985, Sushil and over a dozen members of the Youth Congress stormed a police station in Delhi. They shouted anti-police slogans, created chaos, and even tore the uniform of the police commissioner. The authorities were left with no choice but to file charges against the group. Just 2 years earlier, in 1983, Sushil had been appointed president of the Delhi chapter of the All India Students' Federation. With his elevated status, he became a rising star in the political scene. On March 15, 1988, Sushil made headlines again when he led a group of young men carrying homemade pistols, intimidating civilians and forcing them to support the Congress Party. Not long after, he openly fired at a political rival, yet, astonishingly, faced no consequences. Within the Congress Party, Sushil gained notoriety as a bold and ruthless operator who would cross any line. He was known for handling problems for friends and colleagues through any means necessary, even forming his own committees to collect money, regardless of party rules. In 1989, Sushil was officially promoted to president of the Delhi Youth Congress. That same year, he met Naina. Like Sushil, she also came from a lower middle-class family. Her parents were everyday workers, one a warehouse manager, the other a sports coach. Despite her modest background, Naina was driven and ambitious. During her time in school, she actively sought out political circles and eventually became the student leader at the National Women's Institute of India. Naina's strong-willed, independent personality quickly helped her establish a voice of her own in the political scene. At one point, she briefly stepped away from politics to pursue a pilot's license. But her passion for political work never faded, and she soon returned, joining the Delhi Youth Congress as General Secretary. During her time in the party, Naina built solid relationships with many senior leaders. The person she was closest to was Matlub Karim. They had been classmates and even dated for a while. However, due to religious differences, both families disapproved of their relationship and they were forced to break up. Despite that, they remained close friends. After her relationship with Karim ended, Sushil began pursuing Naina. At the time, he was president of the Delhi Youth Congress, and his confidence and energetic lifestyle impressed her. Later, when Naina's family faced a serious land dispute that almost led to a lawsuit, it was Sushil who stepped in and resolved the matter peacefully. His support earned him her deep gratitude, and they grew even closer. Inside their apartment, police found numerous personal items indicating a once-deep romantic connection between the couple. One of the most telling pieces was Naina's diary, where she had written, "Sushil loves Naina, Naina loves Sushil." They were married in 1993 in Delhi. However, Sushil went to great lengths to keep their marriage a secret. He often told friends, "I'll only get married when I've made it." His parents helped maintain the facade, telling others that their son was still single and unsure about his future plans. This attitude cast a long shadow over their marriage. Sushil, used to holding authority, treated his wife like a subordinate, constantly giving orders and yelling at her whenever she didn't meet his expectations. When angry, he wouldn't hesitate to hit Naina or even threaten her with a gun, as though she were a political enemy instead of his partner. According to those close to them, Naina lived like a prisoner in her own marriage. She was forced to abandon her political and business ambitions. Once a dynamic leader of women's student groups, she had dreams just as bold as Sushil's. While he wanted her to stay home and remain silent, she longed to build a career and assert her identity. This fundamental clash led to frequent and intense arguments between them. Sushil was also notoriously known as a womanizer within political circles. Outwardly, he maintained an image of integrity. He didn't smoke, didn't drink, and regularly visited temples. But behind closed doors, party members were well aware of his murky relationships with multiple women. One of the most widespread rumors involved Sushil and the wife of a prominent businessman. According to insiders, he had shamelessly promised her a seat in parliament if she chose to be with him. Naina knew all about her husband's promiscuous past. She had repeatedly asked him to make their marriage public. When he was in a good mood, Sushil would reassure her with promises like, "I'll make it public once I become a member of parliament." But during moments of rage, he would threaten, assault, and demand her silence. Around June 1995, Naina accidentally discovered that Sushil and the businessman's wife, the same woman linked to him by scandal, had a child together. That shocking revelation made everything crystal clear. Their secret marriage had been nothing more than a trap, a performance to imprison her emotionally and politically. Determined to break free, Naina began planning a move to Australia to start her own export company and reclaim her independence. But Sushil refused to let her go. Furious, he snapped at her, "You think you can open a business on your own? Who's going to help you, Karim?" Sushil's deepest hatred was reserved for Karim, Naina's ex-boyfriend. Deep down, he knew. If it weren't for family objections, Naina and Karim would have likely been married long ago. Wanting to avoid another argument, Naina quietly returned to her room, had a small drink, and made a phone call to discuss her business plans. After she hung up, Sushil picked up the receiver and hit redial. A man's voice answered. It was Karim. Enraged, Sushil slammed down the phone, stormed into the room, and began beating Naina mercilessly. As his fury peaked, he pulled out a gun, pointed it directly at her face, and fired 3 shots at close range. The first bullet pierced her neck, the second struck her head, and the third missed. Naina collapsed to the ground, her body motionless in a pool of blood. Shocked by what he had just done, Sushil quickly grabbed a bedsheet and wrapped her body, but the blood soaked through within seconds. In a panic, he grabbed a plastic tablecloth and wrapped that over the sheet to conceal the stains. Once the body was covered, he changed into clean clothes, went downstairs, opened the trunk of his car, and placed Naina's body inside. At first, he intended to drive to a remote area to dump the body. But as he drove, he realized that simply disposing of it wouldn't erase the evidence. He would eventually be caught. The only way to truly eliminate all traces was to destroy the body completely. However, given Naina's physical size, making her body disappear wasn't going to be easy. After weighing his options, Sushil decided to drive to a restaurant owned by a friend. He was one of the co-investors, essentially half-owner of the place. To him, dealing with the aftermath in a familiar location felt much safer than trying to do it anywhere else. At 10:15 p.m. on July 2nd, 1995, Sushil arrived at the front of the restaurant. As soon as the manager, Keshav, spotted the familiar car, he approached to greet his boss. Without much explanation, Sushil simply gestured and instructed Keshav to immediately ask all customers to leave and to shut down the restaurant. He had something urgent to take care of. Seeing Sushil's serious demeanor, Keshav didn't dare question further. He quickly obeyed, clearing out the remaining diners and sending the staff home early. Once the restaurant was empty, Sushil drove up to the steps leading to the barbecue area and told Keshav to help carry a large black plastic-wrapped bundle from the trunk into the kitchen. When Keshav realized what was inside, a human body, he was so horrified he nearly vomited. But faced with Sushil's cold and commanding presence, he stayed silent and went to look for a sack. The sack turned out to be too small to hold the entire body, so he resorted to using a larger waterproof sheet, into which he wrapped Naina's body tightly before handing it back to Sushil. Initially, Sushil tried to place the body directly inside the clay brick oven, but the space was too small to fit a whole adult. After several failed attempts, he gathered scrap wood and other discarded materials to build a makeshift pyre on top of the oven. Using a knife, he adjusted portions of the body and began placing the pieces into the fire one by one, along with any flammable items he could find around the restaurant. The fire started slower than he expected, which made Sushil anxious. Determined to completely eliminate the evidence, he ordered Keshav to go out and fetch more butter, as well as any easily flammable trash to intensify the flames. Soon the fire roared to life, flames shooting several meters high. A nearby vegetable vendor, still awake at that late hour, spotted the inferno and screamed, "There's a huge fire!" Her panicked cry drew the attention of patrolling police officers, who returned to investigate. Previously stopped at the entrance, this time the officer climbed over the back wall and saw 2 men seemingly burning a human body. As the officer moved in to extinguish the flames, Sushil took advantage of the chaos and fled the scene. Keshav, slower to react, was caught on the spot. Faced with mounting pressure and realizing the consequences, Keshav chose to cooperate fully and confessed everything. A manhunt for Sushil was immediately launched across a wide area. Meanwhile, forensic specialists began their investigation. They confirmed the victim was Naina by comparing the shape of her nose and dental records. Her body had been mutilated, both legs below the knees and both arms below the elbows had been severed. The initial autopsy indicated that the cause of death was a combination of severe burns and massive blood loss. Traces of alcohol were also found in her stomach. However, it remained unclear whether she had been dismembered before or after death. So, the Deputy Inspector General ordered a second, more detailed autopsy. This time, the findings confirmed suspicions. Naina had been shot twice, once in the neck and once in the head, and it was the gunshot wounds that caused her death. Although DNA testing matched the victim with samples from her parents, positively identifying her as Naina, what stunned investigators was her family's complete refusal to acknowledge it. Not only did they provide no corroborating information, but they also adamantly denied the body belonged to their daughter and rejected any allegations against their son-in-law, Sushil. Naina's parents even insisted that they would only accept the body as hers if Sushil himself identified it in front of them. Later, a close friend of Naina told police not to expect such cooperation. According to her, Naina's parents held Sushil in higher regard than their own daughter. In fact, Naina had long been emotionally abandoned by her traditionalist family, who disapproved of her modern lifestyle. To them, Sushil was the one who had tamed her. And if she died, it was her own fault, for failing to fulfill her duties as a wife. Despite this family rejection, the investigation pressed forward. Though the lack of cooperation slightly undermined the credibility of the case files, it did not obstruct the legal process. Thanks to DNA analysis, police confirmed without a doubt that the victim was Naina. Still, her family refused to claim her body. On July 5, 1995, Naina's ex-boyfriend Karim came to the morgue. He immediately recognized the charred body of the woman he once loved. Overcome with grief, he wept uncontrollably and demanded that police bring the cold-blooded killer Sushil to justice. Given Sushil's political standing, the case caused a nationwide uproar. Opposition parties seized the moment to publicly attack the Indian National Congress. Sushil's crime was widely publicized, forcing many of his former allies in the party to distance themselves. In an op-ed, a minister from the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, wrote, "A ruthless murderer is working within the central government. Only by punishing such antisocial elements can justice prevail." On the same day, July 5th, the BJP's women's wing launched a major campaign, chanting slogans demanding Sushil's execution. The next day, BJP youth activists held an even larger protest, calling for Sushil to face the full force of the law. From the moment he pulled the trigger on his wife, Sushil's political and business career went up in flames. He became India's most wanted fugitive. Though he had taken advantage of a final opportunity to escape, one chilling question remained. How long could a man like Sushil keep running? And was there any place dark enough to hide a crime this monstrous forever? 9 days after the murder, Sushil Sharma, his head shaved and accompanied by his attorney, surrendered at a police station in Rohtak, a small town surrounded by vast fields, situated far from Delhi's administrative center. Rohtak was considered a more favorable location for seeking bail. During his surrender, Sushil claimed complete ignorance of the murder. He asserted that on the day of the incident, he had left Delhi for a pilgrimage, first visiting Ajmer and then Jaipur, and thus was not present at the scene. However, when police asked him to specify the temples he visited in Ajmer, he appeared confused and couldn't provide clear answers. Despite this, he maintained his innocence, stating that after flying from Jaipur to Mumbai and then proceeding to Rohtak, he learned of his wife's death and his status as the prime suspect. Following his lawyer's advice, he decided to present himself to the police. In his submitted documents, Sushil attempted to portray the incident as a political conspiracy. He alleged that his rivals orchestrated this scheme to tarnish his image ahead of the elections. Specifically, he accused the current president of the Delhi Youth Congress of masterminding the plot and instructing Keshav, the restaurant manager, to falsely implicate him. Sushil steadfastly proclaimed his innocence. Nevertheless, on July 27, 1995, the police formally charged Sushil with murder. Keshav, the case's key witness, agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. However, Sushil became aware of this development. While in custody, he attempted to intimidate Keshav, even going so far as to bribe fellow inmates to poison Keshav's food, a testament to Sushil's extreme and violent nature. Under immense pressure, Keshav eventually relented. Despite being moved to a separate cell for his safety, he firmly declared that he would not testify against Sushil in court. The preliminary hearing commenced on September 25, 1995. At this juncture, Sushil had enlisted one of India's top attorneys, paying an exorbitant fee. From the outset, the lawyer aimed to prolong the trial, demanding that all case files be translated into Urdu and repeatedly filing motions to change the trial venue to mitigate public pressure. However, the Supreme Court rejected all such requests. On November 8, 1995, Sushil appeared in court, tearfully alleging that the police had threatened him. When the judge requested specifics, Sushil became increasingly agitated, asserting that during his transfer back to jail, the police had attempted to kill him. Despite the implausibility of his claims, the court adhered to legal protocols, summoning the driver and requesting the day's travel log for verification. By January 2, 1996, Sushil made further baseless statements, this time claiming that Naina, his wife, whose body had been incinerated, was still alive. Even though the investigative team possessed conclusive forensic evidence confirming the victim's identity, this bizarre assertion was quickly seized upon by the media and featured prominently in numerous newspapers. The public began to question Sushil's mental stability, while others believed he was merely making desperate attempts to evade justice. On May 2, 1996, Sushil's defense team shifted their argument. They claimed that upon discovering his wife was having an affair with her ex-boyfriend, Sushil lost control. According to them, a struggle ensued, during which Naina died accidentally. Based on this narrative, they argued Sushil should only be charged with involuntary manslaughter, not premeditated murder, and therefore deserved a lighter sentence. Beyond these excuses, Sushil went further by intimidating witnesses right in the courtroom. He would place his hand inside his coat pocket and mimic holding a gun, aiming it at those testifying, a childish yet deeply threatening act. When questioned by the judge, he casually replied that his hand was cold and he was just trying to keep it warm. Despite how absurd it seemed, this behavior had real consequences. Thanks to Sushil's political influence, the majority of the 99 witnesses were too afraid to testify. Only a handful had the courage to come forward, while the rest chose silence to avoid potential danger. After years of legal wrangling, the verdict finally came down on October 3, 2003. Based on Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code, the judge found Sushil guilty of murdering his wife beyond reasonable doubt and sentenced him to death. Keshav, the restaurant manager who had assisted in disposing of the body, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for tampering with evidence. In December 2003, Sushil filed an appeal. But on February 19, 2007, the district court upheld the death sentence. It wasn't until October 8, 2013, that the Delhi High Court reduced Sushil's sentence to life in prison. Then, on December 21, 2018, the same court ordered Sushil's immediate release. After 23 years behind bars, the 57-year-old man walked out of prison and returned to a life of freedom. To this day, the case remains one of the most horrifying crimes in Indian history. Beneath the ashes of Sushil Sharma's crime wasn't just the charred remains of a young wife, it was the brutal truth about the darker side of Indian society. A place where political power can distort justice, where women are still seen as property, and where a man can kill his wife, burn her body in a public restaurant, and still walk free after 23 years. Naina's tragedy didn't end with the bullets or the flames. She was betrayed by her own family, devalued and destroyed by the man she loved, and condemned by a society that saw her as a disobedient woman for simply wanting independence. This case exposed not only a personal crime, but also the deep flaws in the legal system, the patriarchal culture, and ingrained societal biases. In a country where family honor often outweighs a woman's life, the arrival of justice was, at best, delayed and never truly complete.